Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here, and today I would like to discuss games that we wish were two players. Now, specifically when I say this, these are games that already have people in them. So there's, excuse me, two characters. Most likely they were together throughout most of the game, if not the entire thing. And in some of these cases, you actually play as both the characters, you just don't do it in two players. So I wrote down a couple because there were a few that randomly popped in my head, and I figured there would actually end up being enough that I don't need to kind of go off the cuff, because when I thought of the idea, I was like, well, it's this game and this game. And pretty much, once I say one of the first games, you'll be like, yep, I know where this is headed, because they're kind of all in the same vein, if I'm being completely honest. So shout out to PlayStation, because the first one we're going with is Spider-Man 2. When that was first coming out, a lot of people were like, is it going to be two players? Is it going to be two players? We got two Spider-Man. Let us make it two players. And then they're like, no, it's going to be a single player campaign, and everybody was kind of upset. And it's like, I really do wish that game was two players, because there's nothing about the game that really would have changed if it had been two players. I mean, they probably would have had to have added more enemies, but other than that, it's not that big of a deal, because honestly, you get help throughout the game. There are random moments. For anyone that hasn't played Spider-Man 2, I highly recommend playing both Spider-Man and then Spider-Man Miles Morales and then Spider-Man 2. But for anyone that hasn't played it, you get to go, specifically in 2, you get to go around the world of the game as whatever Spider-Man you want. They have missions that are specific to each character. So Peter has his own missions and Miles has his own missions, but you get to play whoever you want as far as like the free roam stuff is concerned. You can just swing around the city, do some missions, and then every once in a while the other Spider-Man will show up to help you. You don't need the help, I promise you. It's the same as any other random encounter that you have throughout the game. You just randomly get help sometimes, and it's like, well, this wasn't 80 more people than the last fight I did. It was just a random fight where the other Spider-Man came in. It's like, all right, well, it was a group of people. I fought tons and tons of groups of people. This time I got help. Sometimes it's not just Spider-Man, and I'll leave it at that for those of you that may not have played yet. But it's really cool, and it's like, okay, well, we play as both these people through story missions, through side missions. You can switch at pretty much any time you want to go around the world and just swing and have fun. Why didn't they make it two players? Because it wouldn't have changed that much about the game. Like, as far as the story missions are concerned, that's a little bit different, where of course, this gets into the idea of, well, if a game starts with multiplayer, people are gonna ask, well, why wasn't it multiplayer during this part or this part or this part? So that's the only thing I can think of where they're like, we made it single player because that's kind of what we do. So that's why it's gonna be single player. It's unfortunate, especially considering there was literally going to be a multiplayer Spider-Man game, which would have been like live service and all that stuff. But they didn't want to go that route, much like Naughty Dog, where they're like, hey, we were going to do an online Last of Us game, but then we didn't want to go that route, because once you make an online live service game, you always have an online live service game. So you always have to keep that going in conjunction with putting work towards whatever new single player thing. And it's like, yeah, we don't want our company to do all this. So I understand why they canceled that game, but it does really lend credence to the idea that everybody was like, they could have just made this one two players, and it could have worked. And of course, like I said, I know there's other mechanics when it comes to the story campaign elements. They would have had to have put a little bit more work in there. But this leads to something else, and I don't think this could be a topic on its own video. I think it would be fairly short, but I would love to know what you guys would think of a game where most of the time you can do two players, and then once there's certain story beats that pop up, it's like, hey, you do single player and it doesn't matter. Like, we take control away from them. If you're playing, obviously if it's couch co-op, which most companies don't give a crap about anyway, it would probably be rare that they'd even allow that anyway. So it would probably have to be online multiplayer, if we're being completely honest. That sucks too, but if we're just being honest, it probably would never be couch co-op for this game. But if they had the multiplayer online, if they just did it where it was like, hey, we got to split you two up because now we're going into a campaign, section where it's like, this is the story beat of the campaign. I would love to know what you guys would think of that, because I'd be fine with it. I've said that for years, for like generations. I was like, why don't they make multiplayer games where sometimes you just have to go back to single player? Like, it kind of sucks where it's like, oh, I want to do the whole thing. But if it's a story thing, and if I can get like 70% of a game multiplayer and the other 30%, they're like, hey, for the sake of our exact story, the characters have to be split up, and we're not making a playable chunk for whatever other character goes off. You just play the main character and it goes back to single player. I'd be fine with that. I know people complain about everything. It's, especially the age of the internet, people will complain about a sunny day. That's just how it goes. But I've always thought, like, why don't people make campaigns like that where you just give us multiplayer for as much as you can, and for the parts where it's just, hey, this is solely story focused, just go ahead and do it. You don't even have to throw them in the cutscenes. Pull a Halo Reach where if you want, you can just throw in a random character that just never gets acknowledged. It's like, all right, well, it's Halo Reach. You're like our last hope. And then the other person that we'll never acknowledge is our other also last hope. Like, you can just throw them in the cutscene, or don't even throw them in the cutscene. That, like I said, that's okay. I think there's a weird stigma around, like, hey, if it's not multiplayer, it has to be like this, but if it is multiplayer, it has to be like this. Every single moment has to be multiplayer. And I've always thought, like, a lot of games could be helped. Not that they would need the help like they're bad, but a lot of games would be helped just from the replayability factor. Okay, 70% of the game, I get to play multiplayer. I get to do a co-op experience for most of this game. There's like, 3 to 4, maybe 5 missions where characters get split up. And that goes for most of these games, by the way. Most of the ones I'm gonna mention, it's all that experience. So I would love to know your thoughts on that, because I've always thought that was a weird thing, that it's like something that people stray away from. Like, it's impossible to just have something where it's mostly multiplayer, but these couple of chunks, you gotta go back to single player. Like, I personally think that would work, because I'm like, hey, if the mechanics are there, just throw it in. Just throw it in there. Like, it doesn't have to be multiplayer 100% of the time. My personal opinion, like I said, it's the internet times. People will argue, like, it doesn't matter. You could save somebody's life and they'll be like, I hate you for doing that. They'll pull an Incredibles. Like, you didn't save my life, you ruined my back. Shout out to the Incredibles, love that movie. But anyway, moving on to the second game, and of course, I have to find a way to throw Resident Evil in here, and this is the perfect one. Resident Evil 0. It has 2 playable characters. Once again, that's the whole mechanic. It's 2 playable characters. If they ever do a remake, I would love to see how they handle it, because at this point, we've actually had multiplayer in Resident Evil, so they could easily do it. And the funny thing about this is that, just like the other games, it doesn't change anything. Most of Resident Evil 0, you have the second character with you most of the game. You can easily just turn that into multiplayer. It doesn't make a difference. The AI has, classic AI, 2 modes. Either do something or just stand there and don't waste all my ammo. That's about it. But you can control both characters. If you have, I would assume, on like PlayStation 4, I assume it's the right stick, R3, but you can control the second playable character. If you're playing as one person, you can control the other character. Like, if you have them in attack mode, you can just walk them around a corner, and then if they see an enemy, they'll start shooting, and it's like, okay, there's an enemy over there. Cool, now I know where the enemies are. They're shooting already, and probably getting jumped depending on if it's a hunter or not, because I'm thinking of a very specific hallway. Or, there's nothing there, and then you just walk around. But the characters are together most of the game. There are times where they split up. That's a part of the, Resident Evil puzzle mechanic. Now that you have 2 playable characters, you can swap back and forth between them. But they're both playable characters, and they're together, like I said, most of the game. There are portions where they split off from each other. There are portions where they're separated, puzzle-wise, but then there are also portions where they're split off for like a decent chunk of time, where like one character is straight up out of commission. So once again, you go to those portions, all right, single player. But for most of that game, both the characters are running around together. You're fighting zombies together, you're fighting hunters together, you're dealing with those stupid effing monkeys. All that stuff, you're doing it with 2 characters. Rebecca and Billy are pretty much, joined at the hip for most of that game. And it easily could have been 2 players. And once again, this is RE0, so when that first came out, it was on GameCube. It was way before they were doing that. So, like, there's a difference. It was, 0 came out before 4 actually came out, for anyone that doesn't know that. So 0 came out before 4, and then of course you get to 5, and that's when we finally get multiplayer in Resident Evil. So Resident Evil 0, if they do a remake, it'll be interesting to see. But Resident Evil 0 could 100% be co-op, and it would not make a difference. It's just like the Spider-Man thing, where they'll pop in every once in a while to help you, and it's like, well, this is the same as every other battle. It doesn't make it easier, like maybe a tiny bit, but it wasn't difficult to begin with. It's that sort of situation. Like, it just makes it cooler, because it's like, oh, there's 2 people here. But it wasn't really hard, that hard to beat it on my own. Same with Resident Evil 0, except they're with you most of the time. They're already there. It's built into the game. That game could have easily been co-op, and it would have been exactly the same. The game still would have been scary, So it's just interesting because once again, the AI will shoot. If the AI is shooting and then you're shooting zombies at the same time, that's the same as another person doing it. It might be a little bit easier because you might be able to have a character, run around the other zombies to kind of aggro them and stuff like that, which is a lot harder to do, on your own when the camera angle is very specific. If it's a wide camera angle and you know how the whole room is laid out, that's a little different. But for the most part, it's Resident Evil, so the camera angles are going to be, a little counterintuitive to trying to have the AI character walk around a table and aggro enemies because you can't really see. So if you can pull that off, you can. It's totally possible, but it'll be a lot easier, of course, in co-op. So small moments like that, sure, but for the most part, you're still dealing with rooms full of zombies or hunters or leeches or, like I said, the monkeys. If you haven't played Resident Evil 0, you're not a big RE0 fan. Trust me, when I mention the monkeys, that's, crazy times. But RE0 could have been co-op. If they do a remake, I really hope it is because it doesn't change the game. You're with the AI character the whole time anyway. It might as well be co-op. So RE0, definitely my number 2 on the list of games that I wish were, 2 players, or really could have been. Like I said, they're there most of the time. The Spider-Man thing, not all the time. Resident Evil 0, all the effing time. And moving to the next game, which is all the effing time, God of War. Of course, this goes for God of War, 2018 and Ragnarok. Ironically enough, there was a God of War multiplayer game for anyone that doesn't remember that. It was God of War Ascension, and it was like an online, mode and stuff like that, which I heard wasn't actually like the worst thing ever, but it was, of course, during that PS3 era, later. Well, I guess that was more, mid to late PS3 era, 360 era, where it was like, hey, here's some, tacked on multiplayer, and just boom, here you go for no apparent reason. But I heard it was pretty decent, and that does happen every once in a while. Assassin's Creed had it, even though they got rid of it. Assassin's Creed did have some really fun tacked on multiplayer back in the day. And Uncharted had tacked on multiplayer when they first did it in 2, and it's like one of the staples of Uncharted now. I love Uncharted multiplayer. It's one of my favorite things. So it was kind of tacked on, but it was pretty decent from what I've heard for God of War. But God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok, especially Ragnarok, they do kind of what Spider-Man does, where it's like, hey, you play as a character, you got Kratos doing his thing, and then, of course, Atreus is there, when it comes to the 2018 game. But Ragnarok has other characters that come in because it's much more expansive, so there are other characters that can kind of help you out here and there because they're doing like a grand scale sort of thing. And it's like, man, this would have been really good co-op. The first game, I think, same thing, it could have done it. But the second game especially, Atreus has more moves, just like Kratos does. Like, it's like, hey, here's all the moves from 2018, plus some extra stuff. So even Atreus has more things that he can do. And it's like, they really could have made this co-op, and it wouldn't have changed that much. It would have changed things as far as, once again, probably would have been a little bit easier, because of course, if you're playing with someone, they'll have their own play style. Atreus typically just shoots arrows from a distance and stuff like that, and he has some melee moves. But if you were doing a co-op, you'd probably see him running and gunning a little bit more. So yes, it might be a little bit easier. They could, scale for that or something. But once again, the characters are pretty much just hanging out 100% of the time. And when they're not, if you're playing that game, there's always 2 people. There's always 2 people, and they all have like a buttload of moves. Honestly, I think a lot of us were kind of like, there's a lot going on here where it feels like if they wanted to, they could do like a real old school video game move and be like, hey, it would be a DLC thing, but if you beat the game, you can kind of just play as other characters, because it seems like everybody that they put in that game has like an insane moveset, because there's so much stuff that other characters do. It's like, there's a lot going on here. There's a whole lot of stuff, and I think people were mentioning that too when it came to DLC. It was like, are they gonna make other characters playable? Because there's like a lot of moves that you can see other people do. And it's really clear that you can kind of set that to just like a couple of buttons. And it's like, hey, it might not be as extensive as, the 20 options Kratos and Atreus might have, where you can swap this move and that move. But they got a decent chunk of moves in those games. And it's like, man, I would love to see that and just be able to play it. So I think 100% God of War 2018 and Ragnarok especially could have had some co-op elements. Even if it was just Kratos and Atreus, they could have totally done that, because they're, especially for Ragnarok, once again, I won't get into like specific details, but there are new moves. There are new moves for both the characters that you can utilize. And it's like, they could have done it, but once again, single player story thing. And if you haven't gotten the trajectory of most of the things I'm going to be referencing, it's, you know, kind of the PlayStation side of thing. Hey, person and other person, typically a kid. A lot of those situations pop up in these games, and it's like, this could have been co-op. And once again, that leads to another game that could have been co-op and even had a multiplayer thing. That is The Last of Us. Naturally, both games, once again, The Last of Us as well as The Last of Us Part 2, exact same situation. For like 90% of the time, there's two characters. And the first game is pretty much 100% of the time. I think it's like 99% of the time there's two characters. I think the very end of that game, you just got Joel, and then there's like maybe one other portion I can really think of. Like the very beginning of the game wouldn't really be multiplayer either. And that's really about it. But for most of that game, two people. And yet we never got it. But there is multiplayer. Obviously those are totally different characters and stuff like that. But you get to play as both characters. It is designed into the game. There's a whole section, sorry if this is spoilers for you, for the very first game, but you don't just play as Joel. Like, there's stuff that happens and you get to experience other characters. I mean, heck, you do it from the beginning of the game, but, you know, once again, that's a single player element. So you play other characters, you get to have that experience where there's multiple people doing multiple things. They could have easily implemented that, but it was a single player story-based experience. Last of Us 2 comes along, exact same situation. About 90% of that game, you just got Ellie, but she typically does have a partner in some way, shape, or form, and the same goes for Abby. If you're playing as Abby, she typically has somebody to talk to her so that there's, you know, it's not absolute silence and there's a bit of dialogue here and there. It happens through most of the game. They could have done co-op for that, and that would have been back to the situation I mentioned before. Big chunk of the game, yeah, you can do co-op. This portion of the game, all right, time to split off. The characters are, you know, not together. You play as one person, and that's okay. For me personally, like I said, complaints and all that crap. If it's not, you know, if it's co-op, it's got to be co-op 100% of the time. I don't believe that. You know, I mean, let's be honest. We've had some games with the tactile multiplayer. For the most part, it's kind of trash. Like, just if they make a game, whatever it is, and they just say, when the characters are together, you get to play co-op. This is our story. Deal with it. You don't get 100% co-op. People should be happy with that. Because there are so many games where, like I said, the ones I mentioned, I think we could have had that. If the characters are split up and that's where multiplayer leaves or co-op is done, fine. But we got to experience it with characters that we literally play through different chunks of the game. Last of Us, like I said, mostly together. You play as all the characters anyway. And even now, especially if you have the DLC, you can literally play as the characters because they pretty much all play the same. But now it's even more so like, oh yeah, it really could have been co-op because the characters have the same moves. You know, they could tweak something, but in all honesty, they could play exactly the same. And would we really care? Would we really care that much if it was like, oh man, Ellie does this much damage, but if you play as Dina, she does like slightly less damage or more damage, or she heals more? Like, we wouldn't care. It could be exactly the same, except they're just two different, you know, skins. That's it. And then boom, co-op. We're happy. Like, that's all I need. That's all I need. But moving on to yet another PlayStation game, and this will be the last one. And this one's actually kind of quick because this one isn't in the same realm as the others where everything was like, hey, a character either pops up in the case of Spider-Man 2, or the character's just straight up with you in the case of every other game that I've referenced today. But that is Ghost of Tsushima. Once again, they do have the mechanic of, there was a multiplayer. They did do that. They even split up the stances and stuff to be like, hey, here's how we're doing multiplayer, and there's story, and then there's the raid mode, which is super fun, all that good stuff. But once again, the mechanic is there simply due to the fact that when you have the story elements for like side characters, if you have them randomly pop up and then it's like, hey, co-op, that's awesome. They could have even done it where the characters just show up. Like, if, you know, if you're doing like co-op and it's just like, all right, well, you're joining this person's world, pick, I think it's like 3 different characters as far as like, you know, the side stories where it's like, hey, you build up your reputation with them or whatever. I think it's like 3 of those characters in the game. And then you just make it where it's like, hey, here you go. You know, you get the old dude who was like the archer. I can't remember anyone's names, but the woman that like lost her family, she was like a samurai just like Jin. And then the other woman who's like a part of like the main campaign, she's with Jin, who like helps him become the ghost and everything. She's throughout the game as well. Once again, horrible with names, so I can't remember. But out of those 3 characters, if it was like, hey, you're joining this person's world, if you want, you can just hop in and then you pick one of these 3 characters. And they, you know, they all pretty much did everything. I don't think either of the ladies did archery. So if you pick the archery guy, he did archery the most. but he also had a katana as well, if I'm not mistaken. So, they could have different elements to the characters if they wanted to do that, but then they could also just keep it simple. Like, all right, hey, it's basically just playing as Jin. It's a video game. Here you go, have fun. I would have been super happy with that. And once again, multiplayer element. It's in there. Of course, they split the stances in that regard, but they could have done it if they wanted to just kind of throw, here's some co-op DLC. This is how it's going to pan out. I think it would be awesome. And I would love to see it. I would love to see that. If there is ever a thing that could change in gaming, I think that's it. Or it's like, hey, we know we made this as a single player game, but we threw in this element of co-op. Granted, that's a whole thing, because it's not like they could just throw it in. It's like they'd have to do online stuff. If they wanted to do couch co-op, that would be another thing, which is, once again, why it would probably just be online, because that would be even more work for them. But it was like, hey, if we threw in an online component to do that, which once again would be a ton of work. I'm not saying that they could just slap on online multiplayer and it's all said and done. It might be easier to do it, to just have it randomly pop up, but then you have to think of like split screen, all these other elements. But if they did it as like a cool DLC, if a company was just like, we did the game, we have the mechanic for, at some point you even play as both these characters with all the face buttons, even if it's just two. We've done it through the whole game. Just throw the ability in there to just have co-op. That would be amazing. I don't see that happening, unfortunately, but that's something that I've always thought we could have, and it would be amazing if we did. I know, once again, it's extra work. It's not as simple as just turn on the 2-player button, but it would be an amazing addition. Honestly, of the games I mentioned, I would love to know your thoughts on that. Like, if you got the option for multiplayer through most of it, I don't think any of us would complain now. That's what makes it easier. This is a hindsight situation. If a game came out with multiplayer, that's when it changes. But if they're like, hey, we're doing single player, if they explained it and you put the expectation out there, this is how the multiplayer works, I think people would get it. People would still complain, of course. I want it 100% of the time. But if people just got the expectation in where it's like, this is how it's gonna go, I think it could work. I don't think it'll happen. I don't think any of this matters, but I think it's something worth thinking about, because I've thought about it for years. This could have been co-op. Like, why not make it where you can play both these characters? Or, at least in a co-op situation. I can switch between both these characters myself, single player, but they didn't add in a co-op element. That's odd. Both characters have all the controls, all the buttons are utilized. It's not like a lesser thing. They both have it. They even have different mechanics and skills that they can do. This is like the perfect situation to just have co-op. I can do this. Whoever I'm playing with can do those moves. It's in there. All these games that I mentioned today have that element where you can literally play as other characters and they have their own movesets. It would have been cool to just throw it in there a little bit later. Hey, when it comes to story mode, when the characters aren't together, it goes back to single player. A dream that I've had for a long time. I don't think it'll happen because, once again, it's extra work. Somehow people will complain about 90% multiplayer, but I think it's an unorthodox thing that I'm sure somebody's done it somewhere. There has to be a game that's done that, but it's very, very rare. So I would hope that that's something we could add into gaming, but I just don't know if it'll happen. It's unfortunate, but that's where I'm gonna end things. Games that I wish were 2 players, because honestly, all the mechanics are right there. They just needed to throw in like a controller number 2 and then boom, you got it. So we'd love to know your thoughts on that. What games do you guys wish were multiplayer, specifically co-op, more likely than not. But which games do you guys wish were 2 players? Please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.